but we think at least half of all bucks, if given long enough to live, will express some genetic non-typical traits. So they may be typical most of their life, but as they get older, they have a higher and higher percentage of producing non-typical characteristics. So there's an interaction between age and genetics that we don't fully understand, and we think that's what largely explains most of this, which is not uncommon in a 10, 11. I mean, we don't see many 10-year-old bucks in the wild, right? And where we see a lot of those are in places like Texas and Canada, where bucks get to live a lot older than they do in Pennsylvania or Georgia or Alabama. So where we see the highest number of non-typical characteristics, and I'm talking about little kicker points and splits and things, are typically where the age classes of the bucks are the oldest. So we see that interaction quite often. In fact, this is another just example. This was another research deer I know well. At this age, he was, I think he was 8.5 on this set of antlers, but up until age 7, he was perfectly typical 8-point. He started doing this as he got older. So we see that over and over and over, that if a buck gets old enough, they will start throwing those. In fact, it's fairly uncommon for a buck under 4.5 years of age to show any real non-typical traits. It happens, but I'm just saying it's not common. Most of the non-typical stuff you see are going to be on older bucks. I've got another example, good example here somewhere.
Well, it also does turn out that there's some inherited aspects of this as well, that some bucks have a genetic predisposition. Antler characteristics are somewhat inherited from either the dam or the male. So, bucks that are typically forming a lot of abnormal antlers, kicker points and drop points and stuff like that, generally their progeny will have a tendency to do the same thing.
Yeah. So it's kind of, it certainly genetics are involved, like I said, but age often helps reflect those traits. And
it doesn't get manifested until that age.
Correct, yeah. So this is another example of a buck that was perfectly typical his whole life until he got to 8.5. This was the year he was harvested. He threw these splits and kickers and things. Otherwise, he was, and you also see more what we call purling. So this knotty substrate at the base we call purling, very common with increasing age, very uncommon in young deer. So none of these are hard, fast rules, but they're pretty characteristic.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, and that's exactly where I was wanting you to go. A friend of ours, Alan Summerford, he kills more gigantic, ridiculous deer in Alabama than probably anybody else that we know. And he's got a house full of just giant deer, and he's got a surprising amount of drop tine deer. And he's not like old or anything. He's a young guy, and he's killed a lot of really nice deer. And I was talking to him about it, and he said that it seemed like there was just there was something to letting them get to be 5.5 rather than 4.5. He said 4 to 5, that's where you get the really good mass. That's where you get the really gnarly bases, purling. That's where you start getting the non-typical points, and that's pretty much exactly what he said.
100%. No, we've seen it over and over for a long time. So yeah, there's no one thing I can tell you with everything related to deer, whether we're talking home range or antlers or anything in between, there's no hard, fast rule. There's always exceptions, but there are certainly preponderances of trends that we see with increasing age. Drop tines, very much a genetic thing, right? If you see a naturally, these are, again, good example. People want to say, is that genetics or not? If you see any kind of knotting or healing, acorn points, we call them the little bulbous points, that's where they've injured it. You can see where the body has repaired itself. Very easy to see that these are not genetics. A naturally occurring drop tine. There's no injury I know that can make a drop tine, right? A true just drop tine. So certainly there's some genetic related traits and there's some injury related traits, and that'll be a good discussion we can dive into a little bit.